Hey folks, thanks for stopping by and checking out the Business Line podcast. In this show, what we're trying to do is get in front of people all over the country, all over the world that are moving and shaking in business, whether they're a part of a big business or they're starting something from the ground up. We want to get to know them. We want to get to know their journey, their struggle, and a little bit about what they love in life. We hope you check out every episode you can. Hey, Chris, welcome to the Business Line podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Brian. Thanks for having me.
Great. So for all of our watchers and listeners out there in the community, just wanted to welcome Chris Ewing to the show today. We're going to be going through a lot of your successes and maybe finding out a little bit about the stumbles along the way too, because I know we all have them. So can't wait to get to know you a little bit better. Can't wait to learn about all the things that you've been doing recently, as well as those stepping stones that got you here. You ready to get started?
I'm ready. Let's do this.
All right. Great. So Chris, tell us a little bit about yourself. We don't have to go all the way to the womb, but tell us about some of the early beginnings of Chris Ewing and kind of how you got started in business and some of your things that's happened along the way, and we'll see where things go.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I always wanted to be an entrepreneur in my, when I thought about life, even when I was young. And in college, I'd sit around and try and make up ideas and figure out cool things that would be business ideas. I had a friend and we'd kind of do it once a week or whatever. We'd sit around and try and come up with business ideas. I got a little distracted from that, and I think distracted is probably the right word, although it's worked out well. I ended up going to law school and became a lawyer. So I'm a corporate securities lawyer by trade, and then I really wanted to get into business. And so this is in 1998, when the internet was just really getting going, and I was looking for any reason to quit my law job. I loved it. I loved being a corporate securities lawyer, but I really
but you're ready to be done.
And so there was this lady, Shari, that was at the bottom of the building, and she had a Shari's Berries little thing, and so I asked her if she wanted to take it on the internet, and she just like, sure. So I walked upstairs, quit my job, and that's how we started Shari's Berries.
That's something else. Now, I won't tell you what I was doing besides graduating high school in 1998, but that's crazy how something that turned into something that it is now, and something that you built early on, that it was just about someone that was downstairs that had a shop, and you went down and said, "Hey, do you want to do this?"
Yeah, I really wanted out. And so, funny story about this. So I went downstairs. Literally, this was like a 20-minute conversation. I went down, talked with Shari. I'd talked with her a couple of times before and said, "Hey, I'd really like to, let's form a company and do this." She says, "Sure." So I was a corporate securities lawyer, so I did a lot of fundraising. So I'm like, well, the first thing we'll need to do is raise money. And so I come back down and I'm like, okay, we gotta raise some money. So I start working on the business plan, and I go, how do we ship the strawberries? And she's like, you can't ship chocolate chip strawberries. And I'm like, well, you just let me quit my job and we can't ship these things. So anyways, that was the first big hurdle. And we obviously figured out how to ship them. For those of you who don't know, Shari's Berries it's become one of the largest gift companies in the world, and it's at berries.com. It's a great company. And we ended up building it into a pretty big business, sold it to Pro Flowers, who sold it to, now it's owned by 1-800-Flowers. Yeah. So then when I got done with that, I started and sold a behavioral marketing company, not that interesting. And then I really wanted to get back in the insurance industry. I had done a little bit of insurance stuff, and one of my friends ran a large retail brokerage firm. And I was like, well, let's start managing. I actually had another friend that was making tons of money running this thing called a general agency. And so I went to my other friend and said, hey, let's make a general agency. And he's like, again, about a 30-minute discussion. He's like, sure, let's do it. So I then have to figure out, well, how do you run a general agency? And then we ended up building 2 general agencies and an insurance carrier. And we sold those assets in 2010, 11, and 12. And then One Inc., which is my biggest business, it was an outgrowth of those entities. So we had problems, various different problems at those entities running them. And then One Inc. was kind of the solution to that. So we operated One Inc. as a software business, and then we got into payments, and then we last year sold it for around $2 billion.
So One Inc. was basically birthed out of some of the things you were looking to solve in your general agencies that you started up.
Yeah, in the insurance company and the general agency, there was a bunch of problems that that we solve at One Inc. And one of which, oddly enough, is how we came up with the name. We were trying to make payments one day. Payments are like, insurance companies are out of business if you can't take a payment. And we couldn't, our payments wouldn't go through. And there was a billing system, and there was a website, and there was a phone system, and there was a internet guy, and then there was and we could not figure out what was wrong. And everybody kept pointing to everybody else. And I'm like, doesn't one person just do this stuff? And I was like, we should make a company that just does all this stuff. And that's what One Inc. is. So it's really, we take all of the software and payment flows around payments and do that with one vendor rather than having, one vendor that does tokenization, one vendor that has a gateway, one vendor that has the website. We solve the entire stack. So it worked out well.
In the process of solving that stack, did you find the obstacles that were keeping it from being done in the first place, or no one ever just thought, hey, why don't we just consolidate all these different things into and solve people's problems?
It's really interesting. That's a great question. I never really thought of it that way, but there's this concept of best of breed. And so when you get to enterprise level businesses, large scale businesses, they tend to look for best of breed. So they look for the best web company or the best payment company or the best this. And the market, because that's what they're looking for, everybody tends to build the best of one little
specialization,
silo. And then
right?
Specialization, get really good at it. But I've always thought the better approach is to just solve a problem. And that problem can be very big, right? So we solved the payment problems for insurance carriers. Doesn't sound like a very big opportunity, but it's just gargantuan, and it's a lot of software. To solve that holistically is the right answer, right? Having all of these different siloed people doesn't make any sense. And so we looked at it as literally, why doesn't one company do all of this stuff? Because it's all one problem. Whereas all of our competitors and everybody looked at it as, we're going to be the best of a piece of this problem, but not solve the whole problem. And we tend to be like Microsoft in that if you look at Microsoft, they are very good at almost everything, but not really great at anything. Yeah. So there's really two ways to build a software business. And essentially we were a software business. You can become great at a very narrow thing, or you can become good at a lot of things. But in the insurance space, I noticed, and it seemed, if we have 5 features and our competitors have 3 features, but those 3 features are way better than any one of our 5, but we have 5, let's say, and there's a minimum level of scale and let's say that they all have to be at a 7. Nothing can be less than
competency has to at least get the job done. Right.
Yeah. So they got to be at a 7. If I have 5 at 7 and you have 3 at 10, I win. And in the insurance enterprise space, especially in our area, that you just win. And so what's really interesting is whenever I think of new software features or functions or products, I think of, let's use One Inc. as an example. If there was a One Inc. 1 and then there was a One Inc. 2, and One Inc. 1 had to compete against One Inc. 2, and One Inc. 2 had this feature, how big of a deal would it be? And there's a lot of features that we come up with that if One Inc. 2 had it, they'd just win all the business. So a lot of people don't realize that having a broader set of tools that work very well makes you more sellable. Now, once you sell the product, then you obviously have to be able to support all that. And the more you do, the more you have to support. So there is an overhang of it, but you won't get the money to support it if you don't win in the first place. So it's
for sure.
Yeah.
Real quick, guys, shout out to our good friend Wayne, because Wayne's been on the show a couple times now. He's launched a card game called Two Hand Hold'em, and he's been such a great friend. Thank you, Wayne, for sending us this recent guest, Chris Ewing. Man, you are just such a great friend of the show, and can't wait to talk to you again, brother. Hope you're doing well. With One Inc., and so you're consolidating all these things that were specialized by, best in class or whatever. Now you've got something that's doing the job of all those things good enough, right? In a good way, maybe not like you said, a 10. I mean, have you seen any other come into the market trying to do what you guys are doing now at One Inc?
Well, the good news is that once you're in an arena and you are a credible to win deals, and once you have customers, you can also innovate, right? You don't have to just do the 5 things. You can do the 6th and 7th that nobody else does. And so that's literally what we did. We started doing some of the items, and then we realized, well, why don't we, and then you just run into problems, right? How do we solve this problem? And sometimes those problems, when you solve them, are game changers. They really, really, really fundamentally change your business and their business. And you have to have the ability to take advantage of them. Let me give you an example of a real game changer that seems like ridiculously simple. A lot of the best ideas, right? You look back and you're like, well, that was easy. Why didn't anybody do that? So we did inbound payments. So we were taking all these inbound payments. And then our head of sales came to me, and I was the CEO, came to me and said, hey, we need more insurance-centric features and functions so that we can compete against people that are coming from outside the insurance industry. So we were the only one that really was in the insurance industry doing payments. So there was a lot of other competitors that were bigger and much better funded, but they were working on, 10 industries. So he goes, I need more insurance-centric features that we can win on. And so I was like, why don't we get rid of checks? So this was in 2018. So really not that long ago. And 85% to 90% of all insurance company payments at that time were paid by check. We're in 20th century. Why on earth is all this happening? So we set out to replace checks and go digital. Now, what's interesting is an entire ecosystem of business has been built around a check. So, they call them drafts in insurance, but been built around drafts. And there's a lot to solve that problem, but it is the most insurance-centric thing, right? It's very few other businesses pay out money like insurance companies do. So we started solving that problem. And once we came out with claims pay, when you marry claims pay with premium pay, so we do both inbound and outbound for carriers, it was over. It was literally, we started winning. We went from winning like 60% of the deals that we were in to 95% of the deals.
So was the pitch when you were talking to insurance company, was it, hey, we're going to make it to where you guys don't have to accept incoming checks anymore for payments or send them out. We're going to solve that problem for you. And they're like, you can do that? Was that what the deal was?
Yeah. I mean, that's part of the deal. The bigger piece was checks are really expensive and a really bad way to do business in the 20th century.
I was going to say, did they see it internally as an issue they wanted to solve? Okay.
Yes.
So it was a pain point. They're like, but we're just doing this. We got to keep doing it.
Yeah. The biggest pain point, this may be too much detail, but the biggest pain point in insurance, let me take a step back because this is, I think, important for people to realize a good way to figure out something. So I was once watching this comedian and he was talking about that he was trying to figure out, he was doing really poorly. And then he would go home every night and he's like, what do they want? Like he'd get booed off the stage and everything. And then what's the guy that, Jim Carrey. So Jim Carrey, so he goes home and he's like, what do they want? What do they want? And he finally figured out what they wanted was an escape from reality. And from the time he realized that to a year later, he was a world-renowned comedian. So I listened to that. And so, I always try and think about my customers and I always go and say, okay, what do they want? What do they want? What do they want? What do they want? Well, insurance companies really want one thing, and that's a lower loss ratios. Without getting into too much details, it's really how insurance companies are managed. So loss ratio is, I got $100 coming in and I pay $60 out in claims. So I have $60% loss ratio. That's what they want. So there are a bunch of ways in which loss ratio will be increased or, bad. The single best way to lower a loss ratio is cycle time. Cycle time is how long it takes to close a claim. So if I send you a digital payment, the cycle time by definition is decreased by 2 days. The other thing that happens with a physical payment is I get this, I go next door, I talk to hey, I just got a check for $5,000. They say, stop, don't cash it. You got to talk to my lawyer. And so I'm a lawyer, so I can say, there are a lot of bad lawyers out there that don't add value to the chain. And they get a hold of it, and all of a sudden now there goes the loss ratios way up. So the most efficient, best way is to pay people digitally, and they want it digitally. You want to receive money right in your bank account. You don't want to have to get a stupid check and then sign it. And so that was a good example of something that we solved that was a no-brainer, but nobody else had solved it. And, the insurance industry has been around forever and technology has been around forever. It's just nobody's really went after it. So that was the biggest thing we did. One of them.
That's really cool. How hard was it in the beginning when you came up with the idea to kind of get it off the ground?
Well, we had a little bit of a cheat in that One Inc. started out really as an IT division for at Keenan Holdings, who is my partner, Jerry Keenan, a great guy. We started these insurance entities. He already had a very large insurance entity going called Cost You Less. And so really One Inc. was just an IT arm for those entities with the idea that eventually we'd make our own software. So we sold the assets that we were supporting in 2010, 11, and 12. So when we sold the last one in 2012, we were making software for the entities with the idea that we would go out and make software for other people. And it was pretty abrupt that we sold the last entity. So we really weren't ready for it. And we said, sat down with Jerry, and he's funny because here he owns one of the helped start one of the biggest software companies in Sacramento history. And he doesn't send emails. So he has no idea. He's unbelievably good at insurance. No idea about software, doesn't like it, doesn't care about it. So he's like, well, you're going to have to go raise money because, I don't want to invest in software. I don't know a single thing about it. So I was like, okay. So we started having to raise money just like, all the companies. And it was as everything much harder. Much harder than it should have been. The interesting thing, like at Shari's Berries or at One Inc., in retrospect, they all seem, well, of course I'd invest in that. That's a great idea. But when you go up to somebody and say, hey, I need $1 million to ship chocolate strawberries around the US. Well, can you ship chocolate strawberries around the US? Well, no, but we'll figure it out. It's like, it starts getting a lot harder. And, so you really have to be able to create prototypes of stuff, prove that it'll work. So we had to do the same thing at One Inc. We were a software business, not a payments company. And we'd signed a large company to use our software, but our software didn't work yet. So we had to spend a long time, couple of years, to get that software up and running. And so we had to raise money without any revenue, which is hard to do. It ended up working great. And then we made the pivot to payments. So the investor invested in software and ended up getting a payments company, which is kind of interesting, but it worked out.
So you've had a lot of experience raising money. In a former life, I was a nonprofit fundraiser. Different thing. Similar principles, right? Go around asking people money to support an idea, an organization that's doing great things, right? A lot of our audience is small business owners, entrepreneurs, people who are trying to figure out how to do this thing, and they're stuck in a job maybe they don't want to be doing, but they've got ideas. What would you say are some keys to raising money when you're someone like you and Shari, like right out of the blue? You had some experience, you understood from a law perspective what you needed to do for capital, but
no operation experience.
What does someone like with a small business, a good idea, do? I mean, make a prototype and jump in their van and ride around? I mean, what's the key?
So the key is, first of all, you want to make yourself personally fundable. So what I mean by that is, you want to be able to present yourself as somebody who people want to invest in, right? So people forget that they themselves are part of the product. So whatever that means in your industry or, whatever you're doing, that's generally why it's easier for somebody who is, a musician, if they want to start a label, would have a better chance than me wanting to start.
They've got fruit on the tree, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So I have experience and understanding. I'm credible in that space. But it is very important for you to realize people are going to be investing in you as much or more than they're going to be investing in the business. The other interesting thing is, so now that you're credible and you do that in whatever way you need to do it, but you've taken that into account and you are financeable. Then what you got to do is you got to create a business plan, which adds enough excitement that greed overruns fear, right? So I come to you and I say, hey, give me $100,000. I want to do this business. Your first thing is not how much money am I going to make? Your first thing is always, I don't want to lose my money, right? So the only time in which an investor will make an investment is when greed overruns fear. So what you have to do is you have to think about what would make it very greedy to get involved in this business. And usually that means building a really good business plan, with numbers to back up, and then good assumptions for how that business will work, and, really enthusiasm about the business. And so a lot of people will, when they go to raise money, they want to have, realistic financials and stuff. The problem, if you give realistic financials, and when I mean realistic, I mean, let's say your range is from $1 million to 100 million you think you could make, right? People will put in, I'm going to show 2 million in my financials. Well, if you actually think you can get to 100 million, then show 100 million, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you have a choice, and everybody will discount whatever number you're going to use. So you should go with what you honestly believe you think that you can achieve. Otherwise, it's fraud, right? You don't want to ever commit fraud. Yeah, you build a business plan and you have aggressive numbers because people are going to reduce them. But they got to be exciting enough that people will, greed will overrun fear. And so, you look at it and you say, all right, now that I've done that. Now, the other interesting thing that I think everybody forgets, or maybe they don't even know it in the first place, is whatever business model you set out to do, it is not what you're going to actually do. So, I think there's only one business that I know of, and that's eBay, that started out as an auction company and ended up as an auction company, right? FedEx was going to move parcels around for governments and then ended up going, oh, well, I can move packages here. We started out as a software company and ended up a payments company. Amazon may be another one. They started out as a bookseller and ended up a bookseller. But most companies start out with one idea and end up with another idea. And so you get so caught up with that this business plan must be realistic and be what we're going to do. But the reality is by day 2, it's obsolete. So you must make honest, good business plans, but just don't be too conservative. So now how do you actually go and raise money? Well, the first way to do it for always is going to be friends and family. So you build this good business plan, you go to your friends and family and you say, hey, this is an unbelievable opportunity. Here's why, here's what the numbers, here's how we're going to do it. Here's how I'm going to distribute it. This is why it's so great. And hopefully, you can get friends and family to believe in you enough that they'll lend you some money, obviously get a lawyer to do it, but they'll lend you some money or invest in you. The other thing that's happening these days, which is really good, is crowdsourcing. So you can get crowdfunding. Yeah. Yeah. And a lot of those are really good for retail products because they can look at it and they can say, oh, I can get that, it's harder for non products, but basically if you can't get anybody that to invest in you, it's probably a problem either with your business plan or you. So, you got to get that fixed and then, and then you go from there. It's not an easy thing to do. Like I've raised money for every company that Shari's Berries is a great example. Here's what happened. I left my job. I was working, at one of the largest law firms in the world, left my job, went to work at Shari's Berries. We could not raise money. I was a professional, new people, couldn't raise any money. So I had to go back to my job. So I went back to Graham and James and went and worked there for a while and worked at night on, at Shari's Berries. And then we used that as and then another guy gave me an opportunity and he said, hey, you really want to do this Shari's Berries thing, I know, because I tried to get him to invest. He goes, I'll make you a deal. You come and work for me as our lawyer, but I'll only have you work half-time. So fly down to Vegas and I will pay you a full wage, but you only have to be down here half the time. The other half the time, work on Shari's Berries. Great. So I did that and worked out really well for them and it worked out great for us. And then finally we got our first investor was George Wong, who is the founder of a large grocery chain up here called Bel Air. And he was the first investor. And then once you get one investor, especially if these first investors really matter because if they themselves are credible, right? George Wong was one of the most respected business people in the region. Once he invested, then everybody else wanted to invest.
Because they know that guy sees something. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So who gives you money matters. And for example, at One Inc., we raised money with Mass Mutual, AXA Ventures, so they're the largest insurance companies in the world. That really helped One Inc. become a household name in insurance because those guys must know something. So that gave us a lot more credibility. So who you get money from does really matter.
I heard a couple things in that. Thanks for sharing that story, by the way. So, and it covers actually one of my questions that I'd written down. I love to ask this question. I always like to ask folks that are obvious, that have success in their life, understanding that successes don't just come out of nowhere. Typically, they're built upon a foundation of failures, right? Or having to go backwards before you can move fully forward. And you mentioned something there. Hey, it wasn't working. So you were willing to go back to work, but not give up. Right? You stuck with it. You saw something there. That's a big thing that I try to talk to a lot of people about. I'm nobody special, but I've definitely, tripped up enough, but over time understood the importance of sticking with things and bearing them out. And, the company that we built, it was close a couple of times where we were like, man, are we going to be able to do this? We've got a couple months left in the coffers. What now? And I remember turning to my business partner, Manny, and say, Manny, just a little bit more time. We are almost there. The well's going to, it's going to break open. You do. So that was good. Thanks for sharing that. I appreciate that, Chris.
Yeah.
So another thing that I wanted to talk about, I heard a little bit of this about you, is talk to me about the importance of being a change agent, whether it's where you are or, changing, something in the market or with something you're doing, maybe disruptive. Talk to me about that a little bit. Coach me up.
Well, the first thing to realize is that if you have a good idea or if you see an opportunity, a problem that can be solved and it hasn't been solved, don't stop and say, well, if it was such a great idea, somebody else would have solved it, right? Everybody, for some reason, thinks that's a good way to not get going and started is, I think it's a great idea, but why is it still, it's too good to be true, that sort of thing. So first of all, realize that every great idea, every great piece of software, everything was somebody said, I'm going to solve that problem, right? So might as well be you.
That's right.
So that's step number one, believe in yourself and your ability to change things. The second thing I think that's really important is the ability to solve problems and iterate. So what I mean by that is, I think remember I said in early on, I started thinking of ideas. And what I do is I'll think of an idea and then I'll start playing around with it in my brain like it's real. And I'll actually run into problems thinking about it. And then I'll solve that problem, then I'll solve that problem. So by the time I talk to somebody about it, I might be a year into the problem solving. So when I'm actually going to do something about it, it may, not in actual time, maybe it's a month or a week or whatever, but there were a lot of problems that I ran into mentally, so that when I actually go to talk to people about the idea, it is really well formed with a lot of, problems already solved. And so I think that's something that you have to be very good at. Now, there's a difference between, I think you brought up a really good point, which is you've got to have a lot of stick-to-itiveness or, not give up. Part of the problem is you have to be realistic. When something isn't working, you got to find out, well, what's not working actually? Is it my pitch? Is it me? Is it the product? Is it this? And then you don't just keep doing the same thing over and over and over. A lot of people, I think, take credit for, I wrote it right into the ground, and I was determined and disciplined and do all those things. But the reality is, if you're heading towards the ground, change something. You got to start steering different. You got to come up with a different business plan. You got to do something. So, I am very fast. And sometimes it drives my team crazy because I'll walk in one day and I'll say, this is the greatest idea ever. We're going to do that. And then the next day I'll walk in, that's not a good idea anymore. This is the greatest idea. Or, so they're like, well, wait a minute. But the difference between the two things is I iterated on what the actual problem that I was trying to solve was and realized that problem isn't the actual problem. The actual problem is something tangential to it, right? That really has a lot more value. And then being able to just execute against it, right? Being a change agent is not just thinking about stuff, it's actually doing it. And so let me give you an example. So we just started my new venture, which is called Notty's Italian Burrito. And
okay. I saw pictures of these, by the way. They look fantastic.
They're the best. It's the best.
They look great.
It's the best. So I started working on this idea of making fast Italian food. And the first problem I ran into was making a menu, and which was going to be a bucket of love spaghetti along with lasagna and a salad. That was it, right? But a bucket of love, so you could make, but like go to get chicken, and you could get spaghetti for the whole family. Which, by the way, is still, I think, a great idea. But the big problem with it was my brother, when I got my menu done, I started working on spaghetti. And he goes, well, you can't eat spaghetti in the car. And I'm like, well, that's why there's no fast food Italian.
Yeah, I can only think of one restaurant that was quasi fast food Italian. They're not, I don't even see them around very much anymore. It's called Fazoli's. Yeah, I don't even see them anymore.
It's a problem. So a lot of people would go, oh, well, that's why there's no fast food Italian, and stop. I said, well, we got to solve that problem. The problem is portable Italian food. So how do I solve that? I go, well, what's Italian that's portable that I like? Calzones. Well, what's wrong with a calzone? Because I could have just started making calzones. Well, I don't like the name calzone. I'm Northern Italian, but I just don't like the word. So I was like, well, I don't want to call it a calzone. So I want to call it something else. And as I started working on it, calzones are too heavy and too greasy. So I wanted it to be air fried, less grease, much less dough. And so as I started playing around with the size of it, it started looking like a burrito. And I'm like, it's an Italian burrito. So that's how the Italian burrito was formed, or invented. And it was just to solve the Italian fast food problem. So we have lasagna in an Italian burrito. We have chicken Alfredo in there, or we have regular pizza stuff like, a supreme pizza inside of one. And they're delicious. But the reason why I brought it up is, so that's the first problem. The first problem, you got to come up with a product. The second problem is you got to figure out how to market it. And then I came up with the name Notty's. So good it's Notty, but not spell it like N-A-U-G-H-T-Y. And then you got to distribute it. So I've never run a restaurant before, so I had to open up a restaurant. And then here's the funny part. I didn't know how to make dough. So we opened up the restaurant, and I've been trying to figure out how to make dough. And I thought, can't be that hard to make dough, right? Like, it's hard to make dough. It's really, really hard, especially to make something unique that is super thin and doesn't burn in an air fryer. So it took a long time to figure out the dough, but we figured that out. So now the problem that we're having, I mean, knock on wood, but it's a huge effing problem, is we have too many customers and we can't make burritos fast enough. So at our new store that we just opened in Rockland, our goal is to make 200 burritos a day, and then we'll be economically viable and start franchising and more than economically viable. It'd be a home run. So we're at 200 burritos a day. The problem is we should be at about 300, but it takes too long to make a burrito.
So is it the cooking of it? Is it the equipment? Is it the supply? Or is it the process of putting it together?
Well, the problem is you got to air fry a burrito, right? So if you air fry a burrito, it takes 6 minutes a burrito. So you come in line and you order a burrito. By the time I talk to you and I go down to the end and I put it in the thing, it's 10 minutes, right? So let's say we have 3 people working in the store, and let's say 10 people are there. Well, you can already see the problem, right? I take your burrito, I make it, I pay for it, I put it in, I turn around, I get the next person. If there's more than 10 people in line, it's going to take about 30 minutes to get through it.
Yeah, that's brutal.
That's when we had 40 people in line the other day, you're talking just an hour and a half to get a burrito. That's not going to work. So I was like, well, how do I get inspired by this? So I tried to figure out what McDonald's did. Well, how did McDonald's solve this problem? So it turns out there's a clip about the founder, the movie.
Great movie. Yeah.
It took them 30 minutes to make a burger.
When he saw the original restaurant, right?
When the original restaurant, it took 30 minutes. But then they had a bunch of business, same problem, right? And they came up with a way to make a burger every 30 seconds. So I'm like, okay, well, we got to make a burrito every 30 seconds. And so to answer your question, how you do that? I have no idea, but we came up with a solution this weekend. The answer is we pre-make the burritos, all of the regular ones. And so we put in like 100 burritos done. And then we call them the 2-minute burrito. So now when you walk in, there's a sign that says a 2-minute burrito or custom burritos. If you want a custom burrito, We just tell people it's going to take 20 minutes. And if there's nobody there, then it takes about 10 minutes. But if there's a line, we'll just say it's 20 to 30 minutes. And a lot of times they don't mind. But when you go to a fast food restaurant, there's no way you want to sit for 30 minutes, right? So we're not 100% through this problem at all, but at least now we're on the road. So this morning I called the manager. I said, how many burritos did you make this morning? And he was like, 40. I'm like, no, make 100 burritos. He's like, well, how are we going to do like we shouldn't have that many. We're going to have waste. And I go, here's what I want to do. Let's make so many burritos we have waste every day, and then tell me we have waste.
Yep. And then let's bring it back from there.
Yeah. Then we can bring it back, because right now our customers are waiting. And so we're never going to get to 300. We're never going to get money. Yeah. Wasting money is the least of our problem. We don't have a good business yet. So we got to change that. And then once we change that and we get to the 30-second burrito, which I don't know how we'd ever get there, but it doesn't matter. Once we get there, then, now we can get to, people always like, well, Chipotle can do 700, but Chipotle doesn't cook their food. They're not cooking,
they're just putting it together, wrapping it and go. I love everything about this story. It reminds me of years ago when I read a book and it told me for the first time about the whole Henry Ford situation when he's trying to solve the problem of the V8. And his engineer saying it can't be done. He can't be done. Yep. He's like, that's not an answer. Lock yourselves back in that room and you can come out when it's done. And he'd check on him. It can't be done. Finally, they broke through. Had he not demanded that, it would have never have happened. And so, and I tell that story to my staff a lot, or, when we're struggling with something, with us early on, it was when we started our remote scribe program. It was, to get started, we hired a bunch of people with a couple of years of experience. So by definition, their experience was predicated on another company's program and how they ran things. And our whole goal was to, and with everything we do, learn the status quo, eliminate the status quo, just do it better in every way, right? Do it cheaper, do it faster, do it better. The staff would come to me, it can't be done. It can't be done. It can't be done. We have to at least change the doctor scribes this often. I go, the doctors hate it when they have to get a new scribe. I don't care what we have to figure out the equation of we can't be switching their scribe every couple months. Well, what if they need a raise? Well, what if they want a promotion? Well, what if a lot of what ifs, but we got to figure out how to
solve them.
And, your story about, the ways that you're iterating on things, you're seeing like, we've got a problem, solve the problem. Great news, guys. We fixed it. Do it this way. You come in a few days later, wait a second, now do it this way. And that can be a headache for people doing the work, but it has to be done. And I learned this a few years ago from a guy who was a former engineer, and in engineering, they call it plan, do, check, adjust, right? You make a plan, you do the plan, you check the plan. If it's not yielding the results you're looking for, find out where you need to adjust, make those adjustments, and then recheck the plan, do it again, check it and adjust it.
I think really good, really great entrepreneurs, and not even really great entrepreneurs, but everybody should be doing this. If you have a vision of what is needed for something to be the next level thing, you just have to demand that. Because if you don't get that and you sacrifice, then you're never going to end up building the product that you set out to build. Just always think of Steve Jobs saying, this phone has to have no buttons. And they're like, it can't be done, right? It's the same sort of thing. His vision was a phone with no buttons. Now, funny enough, they finally settled that it could have one button because they couldn't figure out some of it time-wise. But now today there's no button, right? And so he, ultimately got there. And so you just have to strive for, there's a certain amount of intuitiveness of what can be achieved, even though we don't know how to, versus what is impossible to achieve with your team. And good entrepreneurs know what they can achieve. They just don't know how to achieve it. Whereas bad entrepreneurs or people that are just maybe even mean are just saying it must be done. Well, it can't be done. Like if they don't have any vision of how to make it happen, you still have to be able to execute on it. And then you have to have the right people supporting you to do it. So it's interesting.
And you have to be willing to go find those people who may be better at doing those things than you ever could be, right? And be okay with that. I think a lot of people struggle with that.
Sure. Yeah, my co-founder at One Inc., Tim, he's one of the greatest engineers around. And, one other kind of side tidbit I think is really important. When you're founding a company or you're working with somebody, partners can destroy businesses as much as lack of money or anything else, right? So you marry this person in this business, and very, very, very quickly you will find that partners are horrible until you have the right one. And how do you know when you have the right one is get out a piece of paper and make a Venn diagram of everything you're good at and of everything they're good at. And hopefully they don't really overlap. Let me give you an example. I'm a very innovative product person. Tim could care. I mean, he cares, but he doesn't wake up trying to solve problems and make new products. He tries to figure out how to build them. So we never had arguments over should we or shouldn't we. I'd say, we're going to go and build ClaimsPay. He's like, okay, coach, let's go. I got it. And then he'd start working on so, I love sales and marketing. He doesn't care at all about it. So our Venn diagrams really never overlapped at all. So we never fought about stuff because he would go and do his part. I would go and do my part. And together we were infinitely better than each of us apart. It's really important in business. Even, people say it's like a marriage, but it's really important in business that you have a partner that does things that you don't do or don't want to do. Like you don't, and you both aren't trying to do the same thing, because then you'll just fight about it. So it's really important.
That's a good point. And you're right. It is. Marriages are like that. Friendships are like that. And business relationships are definitely like that. And, you want someone who makes up for your weaknesses, and you can make up for theirs for sure. Yep. Just about used up all your time, Chris. I can't believe we've already been talking for darn near 45 minutes. This has been a great conversation, and I've got all kinds of other things I'd like to get into, but I know your time is short, and we're blessed to be able to have you on the show today.
If you want, I have no problem coming back as well.
We could definitely do that. I'd love to do that, do a round two. Yeah. We've done that before with folks, and I think there's enough to learn from you and enough to glean from your adventures and shenanigans in business that, it would be profitable for all of us listening. So, but in the interest of, using your time wisely, I know you got to get out and take care of some stuff. Chris, Thank you so much for being on the show. Can't wait to talk to you again. And thanks again for being on the Business Line podcast.
Thanks a lot, Brian. It's been a pleasure.